Hi everyone, this is Chris Lim with Theotech and the Church Digital Transformation Project, and today I'm joined with Michael Paulus, the Dean of the Library and Professor at Seattle Pacific University, to talk about what digital transformation actually means. So, Michael, thank you for joining us, and can you open up with that question of this vision of the post-digital church? Mm-hmm. What does that word post-digital mean to you?
Right, so post-digital or post is used a couple different ways. Often it's used to critique something. So you have like postmodernism, which is a critique of modernism, or post-human, which is a critique of what a human being is. So that's more of a theoretical way of talking about post to sort of understand or critique a concept. But it can also be used in a fairly descriptive way. It's just after something like post-industrial.
Yep.
And so the term is helpful in that it helps us both critique what is present, to think about digital technologies and practices, but it's also, it encourages us to think beyond what we currently are experiencing with regard to technological change. And so we have a very present experience of the digital. But post-digital thinks about when we no longer qualify things with the word digital. So we don't talk about digital technologies or digital culture. We just talk about technologies and culture. We've made some of these moves already. It used to be computers were humans who computed stuff, mathematicians. And in the 60s, a lot of that was automated. And then we started talking about digital computers. And nowadays you just say computer because we pretty much understand it's probably a digital computer that you're talking about.
So that's what it would look like for us to talk about post-digital church, is that we don't have to even talk about digital church. Church already is digital all the time. And so.
Exactly right. Okay. So when we talk about digital church, we're thinking about sort of an instance of the church that is distinct from and separate from the physical church. And that's a dualism that post-digital thinking kind of gets you beyond. It's how is it really integrated? So it's just church, whether it's mediated digitally or whether it's mediated through physical presence.
So then it would be just fully integrated into the life of our experience as followers of Jesus in our day-to-day, both in person and virtual. Just everything is kind of seamless and like, oh yeah, that's how I do church now.
Right. It's integrated. And what's interesting about what we're doing right now, thinking about digital transformation, is technology has always changed and transformed our lives. Historically, we haven't really thought much about that. We've just simply found a tool, developed a technique, and then it changed us. It changed our individual lives. It changed our institutions. What I think is fascinating about the digital is we're actually thinking about, we have the opportunity to think about the changes that are going on. Now, these changes have been going on for over 70 years in terms of the advance of digital computers. Early on, you had digitization. So you just sort of converting analog information to digital information. A lot of that was behind the scenes. It was on mainframe computers. It was very expensive. But we started that in the 50s, mid 20th century. And then we began to convert our activities into using digital technologies. And so by the time you get to the personal computer, in the 80s, we're doing a lot of activities that have been, in technical terms, like digitalized. So we have digitized information. Now we have digitalized activities. And now with newer and what are called transformative technologies like big data, cloud computing, AI, we see that this is going to radically change our lives. It already is, but it will change it even more so, our lives and our world. And that includes the institutions like the church and our individual lives and health.
Let's ground each of those those changes. So an example of the first part of that, which is digitization, you said, would be how do we even represent like sound in a digital way, text in a digital way, all this kind of sensory information. And then the second one, you said it was digitalization of activities.
Right.
So what's an example of that?
Automation, I think, is a good example of that. So we had automation before we had digital computers. We had machines that were sort of, doing work that humans could have, did previously. And so we already had automation happening. Actually, I've been rereading Kurt Vonnegut's novel Player Piano, which was written in the early 50s. And it's all about the automation of work. but it's machine based. And so he has thinking machines. Now this is before AI was coined, a few years later at before the Dartmouth conference.
Yes.
But he has the concept there, not the digital computers. Although he knows the theory in the 40s that sort of laid the groundwork for that.
You can have mechanical computers. Yeah.
Yeah. But he sees total automation happening in sort of this future dystopian where humans are completely displaced from work.
Oh.
Which is kind of what we talk about now all the time with automation through digitization or digitalization.
Yes.
And transformation. But the point is that you're using digital technologies to convert work that humans would have done or how they would have done the work. It's not always automation, but it's also augmentation too.
Okay.
So that the work is more, it changes and it's changed and new work is possible because of the technology that are being used.
And I thought of that as basically scale. Like now one person could do the work of 1,000 or 10,000 or 100,000 people. And that's what kind of the digitalization and automation make possible.
Yeah.
So practically speaking, that would be, I mean, you're talking about what Kurt Vonnegut was talking about, which is, I guess, what was happening in the 50s, like factory production and things like that were completely automating. Yeah. And then so in our present time of digitalization, I guess this would be like social media and things like that, where we've kind of moved our communication into the digital realm, almost probably 90% of it, I would imagine.
So if you think about the church, the churches have been digitizing their records for a long time.
Yeah.
Sort of making stuff available online or, using computers. I mean, that's been going on for decades, right? And then digitalization is kind of what we're doing now with streaming, right? Or if we're sort of, automating some processes that we might do, like giving online or something like that, using the technology.
So online giving is digitalization.
Yeah.
Okay.
So most people, most of us are there in some form, whether we really think about it or not. We are using automated processing technologies to sort of get work done.
Yeah.
So the church is there already. So what digital transformation is about is it's thinking about sort of what all this is going to lead to. And so given the transformative power of all these technologies, how do we, what do we do? What's a strategy that we sort of pursue?
Okay.
There are, roughly three options. You can reject it. You can say, nope, I like it as it is. No more change. That is an option. And with some specific technologies, that may be an appropriate response. The next option would be critical acceptance. It's like we are going to sort of do some of this, but it's kind of grudging and not really happy with it, and it's somewhat lesser than we like. But we're going to kind of pick and choose.
We do it because we have to,
right? And kind of like now, if a church is online because it has to be online, when they no longer have to be online, they could say, we're done with that. We're back in the building.
We'll just stop that.
Now, but the third option is proactive design, and that's where you say you think about the technologies, you think about what's possible with the technologies, and then you design and create the future that you desire for that. And from a Christian perspective, you can think about this in terms of telos, in terms of like what is the perfect end, what is the ultimate goal, what is the mission that the church is seeking to fulfill, and with that end in view, then move into sort of a critical critique of technology in your context, and then decide, define, and cultivate formative practices that align you with that. So some of those resist what the technology may sort of lead you to do, some of the deficiencies of the technology. Maybe there's some traditional practices that need to be cultivated alongside the technology that are less technological, or low tech or no tech. But you're developing a strategy for using these technologies, implementing these technologies, and integrating these technologies into your institutional life, individual life, institutional lives, in ways that are transformative, that move you toward the goal.
So I guess like if we look at this, the future orientation, we see the whole world as digitalization, digitalizing, I guess you could say. And so it's inevitable that the church inhabits a world that is digital. And so instead of kind of rejecting that, how do we think this through as the ship is moving into this direction? How do we plan for that? How do we strategize in that world? So maybe we can do that exercise right now, like in a kind of hypothetical way, that I know you've done with some students before for their churches and things like that. How would you use that framework to think it through practically?
Yeah, a couple of colleagues and I developed a framework and published a paper on this a couple of years ago, which we call a framework for digital wisdom. And what it does is, of course, this was this is pre-COVID. This was the pre-pandemic, and it wasn't even thinking about digital transformation explicitly. It was thinking more about present integration of technologies.
Okay.
And so what the framework does is it starts with the question: what is our shared telos? What is our shared goal or end? What is the perfect end that we look forward to as Christians? And that's sort of the vision of the reign, the full reign of the kingdom of God, or the New Jerusalem. There's different ways of talking about that, but that sort of what we're being transformed into,
a restored, like, new creation.
Yeah, new creation. I think new creation is really helpful concept when thinking about our new creations, our new technologies. How do those participate in, sort of facilitate,
bear witness to the future,
the new creation, Christ, that's inaugurating Christ's resurrection. So so that's the first point is sort of getting your kind of eschatological or teleological. And by eschatological, I'm just talking about last things. What's the ultimate thing that we look forward to? What's
the point anyway?
Yeah, and teleological, it's like there's an end that we're moving toward, that telos. And so as we sort of take that as our bearing, not where we were, not what we lost, not where we are now, but really where we're going, the future that is that is coming to meet us, that we're being pulled into, that has broken into the present already. How do what is that? So that's your, and so moving into a ministry context, the question is, what's your mission? Why do you exist? What ends do you aim to fulfill through your ministry? So that's the first question. So once you have that bearing, and that's the biblical narrative and framework that we draw from there. Then the next question is, or the next move is your critique of the culture. So you kind of exegete the culture you're living in, and specifically focusing on technology. We have the biblical narrative. What are the narratives we have related to technology? What do people say that technology will do for us and lead us into? What futures does the technology imagine?
So this is interesting to me, because I would have thought the first critique would have been of our churches, actually, or our ministry, where it's sort of like, this is our stated telos, but practically, what are we actually really doing? And then also, what's our narrative about technology?
You get there, but it's really a more constructive approach of saying we exist for a reason. Whatever our form is, however long we've been around as a ministry, we have a reason to exist. We have a mission to fulfill. We believe we're called to fulfill vocation.
Okay.
Then you do the cultural
exegesis.
And again, that's not new. Good, thriving ministries have done this all the time.
Yeah.
They either emerged because of a perceived need or a demonstrated or obvious need, but then as they continue on, they have to keep understanding their context. They have to the social context they're in, and adapt their mission or their practices. You do begin to, and I suppose it's possible you would say, wow, our mission no longer fits for our context. I mean, that is a possible outcome at which point you would say, and a lot of churches have done this. They'd say, we don't have anyone coming, or we don't have enough people coming. We can't fund our budget. The neighborhood doesn't need us anymore.
Or the young people aren't coming to church.
So there are, you could, in that second step, you could say, our mission is so mismatched from our context that our ministry has been fulfilled, and dying faithfully. There's nothing wrong with that. That happens. But I think most ministries are relevant and can find ways to be relevant in their particular context. They came out of that context. They're not completely disconnected from that context. So, but in this, the lens is really the technological question.
Okay.
How is technology changing our current context?
Okay.
What are the stories that people in our community believe about technology? Is technology going to save us? Is technology going to destroy us? And both those narratives are out there. You have kind of the extreme transhumanism view. It's like that technology will extend and enhance life. That'll be that. We don't need anything else. And then you have other people who are just very dystopian, kind of like Vonnegut's player piano, where it's just like, this is doing some really bad stuff to us.
Yeah.
And again, there's different strategies for responding to that. But then the third, once you've focused on telos, once you've focused on your cultural exegesis, the third move is really about, well, what are you going to do? What are the practices, traditional practices that you have as a church or spiritual disciplines as an individual? And then how do those need to be aligned, given what you know? And there are practices that we adopt or we're forced into because of the technologies that we interact with.
Yes.
Right. Our attention is distracted, or we're sort of outsourcing a lot of our decisions, because of the things we can do. And so part of that critique is to say, we probably need some counter-formative practices. We are being formed by our technology, but we want to be formed toward another end. And so what are the counter-formative practices that we need to develop? And there are a lot within the Christian tradition that one can draw from, spiritual disciplines, corporate disciplines. Some of those are traditional, and can kind of evolve, given the technological change. But they could also be new, innovative practices that you could grow and cultivate to connect again back to your mission in your present context.
Let's dream or imagine a little bit, or maybe ground it in some examples. So when you say spiritual disciplines, or like even liturgies, I think those are two interesting things to think about. I know that one unintentional quote unquote discipline that's probably I want to counter is getting up in the morning and like checking Facebook or something. Yeah. It's just habit now. It's become a practice, and it's like it's not the healthiest one, and doesn't form me into Christ-like character necessarily. So
one of the things that's been good in the last few years is there's been a lot of pushback on technology companies and how aggressive they have been in sort of captivating, capturing, and commoditizing our attention. So Tristan Harris has his movement, Humane Technology, and so I think so now your phone, my phone, will show me where I spend my time.
Yep.
And I get a report, and I can suppress that, or I can look at it each week. And it's trying to, and there's a lot of other things that Google and even Facebook have done to try to let people be more aware of how they're using technology and sort of what their practices look like. And so I've been encouraged by that, so that there is the sense that there's something that we need to be aware of and hold technology companies accountable to, that our attention is a very precious resource, and that we need to protect and preserve that and cultivate that, and not just let the technology platforms override us, because they can. I mean, they know how to manipulate us. They know the neuroscience better than we do, and it can get pretty scary in terms of how effective they are in manipulating.
I think that's really interesting, because this touches on something related, which is the fact that solution of a transparency report is a very digital culture solution. It's a very technological solution. You could have other traditions that might come from like Christian contemplative practice or whatever else like that, where they use other not digital mechanisms to try to form those habits and try to counter it. And church culture and other things like that. So every culture can bring almost its own ideas for solutions to bear into this attention problem that digital has kind of brought up for us.
And I think that's an important point, because while I wouldn't want or expect a technology company to solve the problem, there are things and tools that they can provide me with to help me sort of address the issue. Now, there's a lot that I have to do. I have to sort of decide, what's the first thing I should be doing in the morning, or for me, or what I think is important. And you can make decisions about that. How do I want to end my day? And so we develop these. Hopefully, we're intentionally develop these sort of personal daily liturgies that sort of shape our days and shape our weeks too, because rhythm is important. I mean, that's a very ancient biblical insight. Sort of the rhythm of the week. The idea of the Sabbath. And so that's and then the liturgical year too built out. So having these rhythms is important, whereas technology really just wants your attention all the time.
On its own.
I mean, the CEO of Netflix, in a often quoted line, said his greatest competitor was sleep. I mean, but that's the point. So technology has a certain tendency. I mean, technology, well, we design technology, we're responsible for it, but the technology itself is, if it wants to maximize your attention, well, it wants to maximize it 24/7.
I heard a story, I think in California, where the fire department, because the wildfires raging there, is collaborating more with some Native American tribes that have history of, in their culture, cultivating fire and burning strategically in ways that basically let them use it to shape their environment and to protect the forest, actually. And before, during the time of more kind of, I guess, colonialism, they stopped all those practices. They would just try to suppress fire. But what happened is that resulted in so much material that now burns out of control.
Right.
So they're trying to integrate that now. And I think of it as digital, like you said, it's just trying to suck all your attention. But as you cultivate these liturgies or practices as people of followers of Christ, we can actually now shape our environment and kind of use it for the purpose that God kind of created it for.
Yeah.
But what do you see being not only a personal liturgical practice, but a communal one, like a worship service? How would you redesign the worship service to acknowledge the reality of the digital and bring it to the forefront of Christ's mission in the world that God's sending us on?
That's a very big question. I did want to back up to your point because another insight in that is the recovery of an ancient tradition.
Mm-hmm.
And so one of the mistakes that we many, not all, but some in the church do tend to make is that we ignore what's past because we think that what we're dealing with is so new.
Uh-huh.
And so we actually have a very, very rich tradition that we can draw from. And we are dealing, I would argue we're dealing with unique change, a unique period and moment in history. It doesn't mean that there isn't wisdom we can draw from the past.
Mm-hmm.
And so the tendency to say, we know better, we can scrap everything that's old. Forest management is an example.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, you see this a lot in some strains of Christianity where it's like, while there's an acknowledgement that, this, what we get out of the Bible is important, the actual, 2,000 years of wisdom on how we cultivate practices, even related to technology in earlier forms, isn't really looked back on as a resource very much. It is in some cases, but not very much. But in terms of how you, to get back to your question, in terms of how you innovate or how you think about, I think it starts with just playing with the technology you have in front of you. So, a lot of churches went with streaming. There's some technical, things you have to do to implement that, but it's actually a fairly easy thing to do. It's just broadcasting in a different medium. We've been doing that for a very long time. Other churches went more to Zoom meetings, and that required them to adapt their services because you can't. How do you get everybody in the box, right? And so some broke up their order of worship, and they'd pan to the people in the sanctuary, or they'd pan to the pastor in his study, or they'd pan to the worship leader from home. And what's been interesting is how churches have begun to explore that and realize, there's this chat feature. People like to use this chat feature. They're, for like sharing prayer requests. Or, actually we don't have to broadcast anything from the sanctuary. Or there's other musical resources we can bring in from online, rather than using our own worship team. So I think that, many churches in the last few months have begun to play with the platform and see new ways of developing shared practices around connecting online. How do we connect online in a way that's edifying?
So one thought I've had as this is a totally experimental idea, is what you said, that it actually, nobody has the answer. So what we need is a lot of experiments.
Exactly.
So we learn and play with the medium until we get to some answers along the way that we share with one another. And that was one reason why I wanted to do the forum, was that people could then share what they're learning with each other. But I had a thought, which is that the pastors today, because a great sermon has already been commodified for a while. There's so many great preachers that you can just listen to. And so something unique for the local church context is the pastor knows you. They speak into your life. They care about you personally. And to create those kinds of tools that make that possible, where maybe the pastors can even be designing liturgies that you can be using throughout the week, or something that is just accessible to you, to help you create those formative practices. They kind of change their role. They're not just like, preacher on a stage, on a video, okay, prayer requests, we're going to do these things. they're actually constantly co-creating with you things to shape your life both digitally and in person to make you a disciple. And there's some tooling that technologists, we can try to build to support it, but the genre, like the idea, like, this is what we could be doing instead, I think it's something worth exploring.
No, I think you're right, and it connects with an idea that I, as a library dean, we've been doing digital innovation for a long time, right? We got rid of the card catalogs a long time ago. So I mean, my professional career has always been about digital, digital librarianship, digital resources, digital services. So one of the things that libraries figured out that back in the late 20th century is that because of the power of a network, so it's pre-internet, because of just networks, local networks, we figured out, we don't have to acquire every book that's ever been published. We can focus on acquiring what we need to focus on locally. And then we'll be part of this larger consortium with you get all these different libraries focusing on their unique local collections, or locally relevant collections, and then you aggregate that, then you can share materials. We now do this with digitally too. So we share digital infrastructure, we share digital resources, negotiating and providing access to. So that frees us up to really focus on what we do locally. So our local role, what we collect that's most important for our community, the relationships that we cultivate and build in that community, largely through teaching and research support. And there's a lot that we don't do anymore. 50 years ago, every library, kind of like a church, had to do the whole thing.
Yes.
You walk into the building, we got to, in the building, stuff as much stuff as we can put in there, so you can use it. And then there were different things like microfilm and, and then eventually digital came along, and then that really opened it up, because now, we talk about sort of we think local and act globally. Right. And so I think there's a model there that's suggested for the church. What you were talking about, how do you focus on what your local context, what is unique for your context? What do people in your local context need? And pastors have always done this. They've always exegeted the local congregation. But if you leverage now the stuff that isn't distinctive to your context, and you move that to the network level, then that frees you up. It frees up your time, it frees up your resources, and it enriches, the church as a portal, the local congregation as a portal to the larger community.
That is a powerful vision. I absolutely think so. And to use my language from technology, it's like you're building a platform. It's like all these things that are kind of non-differentiators. Right. You can basically all just leverage it from the network, and you can focus on the value that you specifically add. And I'm hopeful that actually our churches can actually move that function up. And I don't know what it looks like. There's already the middle level governing bodies, but it's not obvious that they're geared, they're not really tooled for that level of networking value. Well, thank you, Michael, for this discussion about the post-digital church. And I'd also like to take a moment to thank the M.J. Murdoch Charitable Trust for making the Church Digital Transformation Project possible. And if you'd like to continue this kind of conversation, you can go to cdx.theotech.org and chime in there. Thank you.